the third and last video of Unit 2 about the Age of Revolution. So in the previous week and previous video, we talked about the different phases of the French Revolution and later the period in which Napoleon ruled over France. So the story ended when, after a first attempt, Napoleon was finally sent on exile to the island of Saint Helena in the middle of the Atlantic. And after his defeat and the victory in the Battle of Waterloo of his absolute monarchs, of his enemies, the absolute monarchs of Europe, the consequence of that was what was going to be called the restoration of the previous situation to these years of revolutions. We should remember that so the restoration took place in, we can say, the year 1814, 1815, with this impasse of the return of Napoleon. But 25 years had passed since the beginning of the French Revolution. So from, with historical perspective, we can think that maybe it was quite naive, naive is ingenuo, to believe that things could return to what had been 25 years before, after all that had happened. That had been a lot. And mainly, and this is one thing that we always learn in history, when people learn that things could be different for them, in this case, the non-privileged realize, that a more equal society could be possible, that a system different to the Ancien Regime could be possible, even when they tried to return to the previous situation, it was going to be just temporary. Yes, so this attempt by the absolute monarchies to return to the previous situation as if nothing had happened, it was doomed to fail. Okay, doomed to fail is que está condenado a fallar. Yeah? So the main absolute monarchies in Europe met in the Congress of Vienna, summoned by Metternich, that was the Austrian foreign minister. And in this meeting that, as I said, was interrupted by the return of Napoleon, the Battle of Waterloo, and then, they had to resume it. Their goal was to return, in most of the cases, but not all cases, to the previous borders that existed in Europe before the wars that had, as a consequence of the French Revolution. But in this return to the previous situation, Austria, Russia, and Prussia, the winners, changed certain borders at their benefit, so gaining territories. And also, fearing, after what had happened with the return of Napoleon, and fearing another return of the revolution, they decided to create a buffer state. Okay, a buffer state is, it would be like a state that is between, to prevent, to have a direct border between France and, in this case, Prussia at that time, and the German states, and also Austria was just near. So at the same time, they decided to create, to reinforce, in this case, the Low Countries by adding Belgium. Yes, so by creating this bigger state, they just try to reinforce this presence, and somehow have a stronger presence there that might, balance the situation. I mean, as you could see, the border that they had was bigger, but at least, they didn't want France to have a strong presence on Belgium. So Belgium, that it did not exist, had not been really an independent country until then, until that moment. So what they created was what was going to be called the Holy Alliance, La Santa Alianza, and its purpose was mainly to combat liberalism and revolution. Yeah, so it was mainly created by the three empires. So the three absolute empires, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, with Great Britain, which was quite inevitable because it was a very important European power, although its position as an island, as a growing trade empire, not so interested in what occurred in continental Europe, but it was an important presence there. And a little bit later, a couple of years later, 3 years later, France also entered. Once they could be sure that the restoration of the Bourbons in France in the throne as absolute monarchs seemed to last. They were going to be wrong because it wasn't going to last for that long. So here in this map we see the new situation. So what it basically happened, the most obvious change in the map was that Poland disappeared. Okay, there had been previous movements in the second half of the 18th century in which Prussia, Russia, and Austria had already taken parts to Poland, but after this, Poland disappeared and will not reappear until after World War I. Also, this strengthened the position of Prussia, that we are going to see that from this moment on is going to be a very predominant country in Europe, and also they are going to start thinking about the unification, because remember that this border is more or less so the territories that had belonged to the Holy Roman Empire were not unified. Yes, so what is more or less now Germany was a myriad, a chaos of many, over 100 small states. Yeah, and there were two big German states. One was Prussia and the other was Austria, And now the problem throughout the 19th century was going to be how to unify the German state, the German territories. Yes, so all the territories that spoke German and that had a German culture, with the problem of these two big countries. But we will talk about that later. Yeah, so France's borders remain more or less the same, losing its influence over Belgium. Yeah, and these territories here, Savoy and Nice, were added to the kingdom, of Piedmont, Sardinia, with the island of Sardinia. Yeah. So as a consequence of this restoration, the reactions were going to appear quite soon. Yeah. So as I was saying, once people had lived, even even under the oppression of the invasion of the Napoleonic army, some ideas of equality amongst citizens, of like a civil code of law, or like the idea of separation of powers, representation, like a more equal taxation, and so on, had permeated a lot in society. So the attempts to return to this situation, so this first experiment of liberalism, were going to appear quite soon. So the first one, and then we talk that these attempts were going to appear as waves in Europe. So the first took place in 1820, and actually started in Spain and later in Portugal. So what occurred is that in Spain, after the War of Independence, when the Napoleonic army invaded Spain, Spain resisted because of basically the self-organization of the Spanish people, and later with the support of the English army. And so once they signed a peace treaty with Napoleon in 1812, they, the King Ferdinand VII, returned to Spain. And in principle, we will see this later, but in principle he returned promising to obey the constitution, the first constitution of Spain that had been passed in 1812. But once he was in Spain, knowing that he had some support of people that refused that constitution, he decided not to swear that constitution, and actually he started to prosecute the liberals that had promoted that constitution, and also the ones that had supported the government of occupation of under the Napoleon rule. So this attempt of this absolute rule of Ferdinand VII lasted between 1813, 1814 and 1820. And at that moment there was an uprising, un levantamiento, that actually took place where the troops that were going to be sent to the American continent, where there was a war going on in the colonies for their independence. So those soldiers that were meant to be sent, had an uprising against the absolute monarch. So the king was forced to swear the constitution and accept to rule as a liberal monarch, a parliamentary monarch. And this was going to be emulated in Portugal, that had a, not similar situation, but somehow similar situation. But this didn't last for long. So after 3 years of Ferdinand VII ruling as a liberal monarch, the Holy Alliance sent an army that was called the 100,000 Sons of Saint Louis, which is probably the most funniest name of an army for me, Los 100,000 Hijos de San Luis. They sent this army to put Ferdinand VII again in the throne as an absolute monarch. Yeah, so return him to the previous situation. So we can say that this first revolution lasted a short period of time and then it failed. And also a little bit later, this first wave had an echo on the other end of the Mediterranean, where Greece started its independence war from the Ottoman Empire. Yeah, and they will end up winning years later. This war was going to occupy most of the 1820s, and probably if it hadn't been for the support of other European powers that were interested on having a control over Greece, maybe Greece wouldn't have been able to succeed. Maybe yes, because they really were very well organized, but at the same time, although the Ottoman Empire was a very decadent empire, was still an empire against a small part of it. Well, the second wave took place in 1830. And in this second wave, we can see that, the attempt came just to try to put some moderate model, yeah, following the taste of the high bourgeoisie. So it started in France, and they attempt to change from Louis the 18th, a Bourbon monarch that was ruling as an absolute monarch, to a more liberal monarch, Louis of Orleans, that was of another dynasty, that they were cousins or something like that. So they had this change without much difficulties. And as another consequence also, the Belgians rebelled against the Dutch domination, because they had created this buffer state that had been created in the Congress of Vienna. And but the Belgians didn't want to be under the rule of the Dutch, so they had a short independence war and they became independent in 1831. They had the support, in this case, of the UK. The UK was interested on supporting Belgium. If we look at the map, Belgium is just across the English Channel. So having somehow, like this excuse to protect this territory, this small country that was neutral, that declared itself neutral. On the other side of the English Channel, for England, was an interesting way, to have one foot on the continent. We have to remember this for what will come up in the future. And then we have the Revolution of 1848. This was the most intense one, the one that had deeper consequences and that had more echo in like most of the countries. At the same time, it was the one that was more progressive of them all. So they went beyond the demands of census suffrage, and collaboration with monarchies, and they started to talk about universal male suffrage, popular sovereignty, which means not the sovereignty of the nation, but just of the rich, but of everybody, and even social equity, referring not to equality in front of the law, but that everybody, all citizens, had the same opportunities. And in this moment, we see that the driving force of these revolutions were really the workers. In the next unit about the Industrial Revolution, we will talk about how throughout the 18th century and the 19th century, more and more people had moved to the cities and had started working in factories. So now these masses of workers, of urban industrial workers, started to be determinant in the political discussion. So now it's not going to be so. From 1848, the revolution of 1848, we can say that is the last bourgeois revolution, but also the beginning of the revolutions and other workers' movements that we will see in the next unit. So although for some months, so these revolutions started in spring, and they seemed to succeed. Many governments had to accept the demands of the revolutionaries, but after a first phase of success, the armies of the Holy Alliance of Russia and Austria decided to fight back. And at the end, the revolutions failed, with the exception of France, in which the Second Republic was proclaimed. So Louis of Orleans, that had been put on the throne as a liberal monarch, didn't last for long, because just 18 years later, well, not that short period of time, but was forced out, and France had its Second Republic, proclaimed. So these revolutions that were had a massive echo in Europe, even when they were in the places where they failed, on the midterm, they ended up forcing deep changes in the countries that had taken place. So this time, the governments of these places realized that if they didn't change things, more revolutions will come. So this is really the turning point in which we start seeing changes in most of European countries, to adapt and to start transitioning towards democratic countries, more or less democratic countries. So, the expansion of liberalism was the first consequence of the Napoleonic invasions, and the expansion of nationalism was the second consequence of that. Nationalism I'm sure you are acquainted with the concept of nationalism. So nationalism is a political ideology that tries to recognize the right of people to decide themselves as a nation. So only when the concept of nation appears, we could start talking about nationalism. Yes, so this concept of nation starts to be mentioned at the end of the 18th century and mainly the beginning of the 19th century, when, like most of European, continental Europe was conquered, occupied by the Napoleonic armies. So this means that only under the invasion of others, some European peoples started to feel that they had something in common with, as communities that were not recognized as states. Yeah. So these things, the most evident was language, but there were other things such as religion, their traditions, their past, their clothing, their traditional food, and the traditional dances, and so on. So these nationalist movements were going to have two consequences, or two tendencies. One that was going to lead to the disintegration of states. So like nations that existed in big multinational states, for example, in the most evident case is the case of the Austria-Hungary Empire, or the Austrian Empire. There was a huge territory with people that spoke different languages, had different traditions, and so on. Also, for example, Greece, as part of the Ottoman Empire, was very clear. The Ottoman Empire was a Muslim empire, and Greece was Orthodox and European, and so it was quite evident. And then we have, for example, all the Balkan area that is just something that we will leave for later because it's extremely complicated. And then the other consequence, or the other tendency of nationalism, is the unification of states. Yeah, so territories that shared a language, culture, traditions, religion, but had never been one country. Basically, were Italy and Germany. Both territories were the only survivors of the political divisions that had existed during the Middle Ages, when all Europe was divided in small territories. In the rest of Europe, if you remember what we studied last year, in the 15th, 16th century, there had been a process of creation of modern states, modern authoritarian states in Spain, in France, in which monarchs had been accumulating more power, and just unifying laws and institutions and so on. So Italy and Germany were survivors of that old model, and it became very evident, and more after the occupation of the Napoleonic Army, that something had to be done. Yeah, and also in the context of the Industrial Revolution, of the expansion of the capitalist model, economic model, having bigger and stronger states, that had unified markets, just became paramount, became very important. Yeah, so we are going to see these two examples of unification that have some things in common and some things that are not so similar. So Italy, by the beginning of the 19th century, was divided into 6 states. Yeah, all the south was the kingdom of the Two Sicilies, that was ruled by a branch of the Bourbons of Spain. Then they had the Papal States, that was all this part in the middle that just had reached both coasts. And then we had Tuscany. There we have other territories that actually Modena, Bologna, and then the territories that were under the control of Austria. Yeah, Venice or Venetia, Lombardy, and Turin. Yeah. So and then yeah, we have the territory of Piedmont Sardinia, you know, that had appeared as a consequence of the new distribution of the European map of the Congress of Vienna, and this was going to be an important agent. So once it had become very evident that Italy should unify, the question was how to do it. Yeah, because the problem was that, for example, like some territories were not like didn't want, like one option was like that the Pope would unify the territories, but a lot of territories were not interested into that. The problem, also was that the Pope did not want to confront the Austria-Hungarian Empire that controlled these territories here. Sorry, and then there was another option to create, a fusion of all states under a republic, but a lot of, the economic and social and political powers of the different territories in Europe did not agree with this. And then the less bad option was going to come from Piedmont Sardinia. Yeah, this Piedmont Sardinia was a modern state with more or less kind of liberal ruler and a minister, prime minister called Cavour, that had decided to take the control of this situation. Yeah, so this was going to have different phases. The first one was going to be war against Austria in 1859, in which they were going to take control of these two territories. And then once they had succeeded in this, Cavour had some secret conversations with Garibaldi, that was a revolutionary Republican leader in reality, so of that option that was not popular amongst the powerful. And they agreed secretly that Garibaldi was going to prepare an army, and that they were sent from here, or I don't know, from Sardinia, to the kingdom of the two Sicilies. Yeah, so they landed here, and soon they took control of the kingdom of the two Sicilies because they had a lot of popular support. Yeah, and later, they advanced here and they took control of most of the papal states. If they didn't take control of all the territory and they left the territory around Rome, was because one, they didn't want to confront the Pope, and secondly, France and Austria, if my memory is not wrong, sent an army to defend the Pope, because the Pope doesn't have his own army. Yeah, so this way, this territory around the city of Rome remained under the control of the Pope for some time. Yeah. So after this, in 1861, the first Italian parliament, so now the newly formed first Italian parliament, proclaimed the king of Italy who had been the king of Savoy, but now was the king of Italy. Yeah, so Victor Emmanuel II in Italy, Vittorio Emanuele II. Yes, so at this moment in 1861, they controlled these territories. Yeah, so basically all, with the exception of the territories around Rome. So only in 1870 they will be able to take control of Rome. How did it occur? So when France had to withdraw, tuvo que retirar its army because they entered in a war with Prussia, then the Pope was undefended, and then Italy managed to incorporate these territories. This was going to have as a consequence the animosity of the Pope for a very long time. And Italy was not going to have official relations with the Pope until the year 1929, with the fascist rule of Mussolini. we will learn about that in the future. So by 1870, the unification of Italy was a fact, and they moved the capital to the city of Rome. The only thing was that, like, some people reclaim other territories that they considered that had been part of Italy. Yeah, you see here Trieste, Zara, Ragusa. They reclaimed these territories as Italian because they had been cities founded by the Venetians, and that had been occupied a long time ago by the Ottoman Empire. So these demands are going to be somehow relevant later in the future, so I will remind you this. And then, to end this unit, we have the unification of Germany. So until the 19th century, Germany was divided into many territories. I said before, 100 is not. 36 territories, states of all kinds. Some were big, such as Prussia. Some were super small. Some were just like independent cities. Some were ruled by the church, by, for example, an archbishop, and others were ruled by small princes or dukes. Yes, there were dukies. So in this territory of what had been the Holy Roman Empire, there were two major Germanic powers. So one was Prussia, that had, throughout the 18th century, had been expanding its territories. This, but also this. And Austria. Austria was bigger. The problem with Austria, as you see here, is that part of Austria had was German, and the other part of the Austrian Empire in reality was not German at all. Okay, it was now Hungary. What's his name? Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and more. And all the here Serbia, Bosnia, etc., etc. So this altogether, with the fact that the Austrian Empire was very backwarded, and just tried to maintain an absolute rule, just made it a worse candidate, for the unification. So after the experience under the conquest, under the occupation of the French, it became evident that they needed some kind of unification. So the first attempt was to create a customs union, una unión aduanera, which means a territory that, although is not politically unified, doesn't have customs, so doesn't have borders to transport goods, to move goods from one place to another, and doesn't have tariffs. It was called the Zollverein. So most of the German states became part of the Zollverein, with the exception of Austria. Then in 1848, in the last wave of the bourgeois revolutions, an assembly with representatives of all the German states offered the King of Prussia the crown of Germany. But the King of Prussia, that was quite authoritarian himself, declined it because he considered that if he was meant to be the king of Germany, he would do it by his own means, not being offered by representatives of the states in a liberal parliament. This gives us an idea of the kind of ruler that was, in this case, William I, the German king, the Prussian king, sorry. But somehow, even after this failure, it just became evident that something had to be done quite soon. So just some years later, Wilhelm I, with his chancellor, that is like the prime minister, Otto von Bismarck, decided to undertake the process of unification. And instead of doing it in a peaceful way, the way it could have happened in 1848, when the representatives of the different territories peacefully offered to become one country, what they did was just like to have a series of wars, and incorporate the territories. So Otto von Bismarck was going to become a very important character in Europe of this period, the second part of the 19th century, and he was going to be an expert on, like a diplomatic expert in the way of manipulating the international relations at his favor. So I'm not going to explain in detail, but they provoked a series of wars with other territories that were not German states. So first with Denmark, First with Denmark for two smaller states that were in the border that had been disputed. So Denmark lost, and these territories were incorporated. Later against Austria, so they could incorporate these territories of the south of what is now Germany, and later, to finish up, in order to incorporate these territories against France. In all the cases, in these three wars that took place in just 10 years, they basically made up situations in which they forced these wars. So they had the justification of this, like to incorporate the territories. So after these three wars, and the third one with the defeat of France, that was going to have serious consequences for France, the William I was going to be proclaimed Kaiser. Okay, Kaiser comes from, the etymology of Kaiser is Caesar. So again, we see how a ruler uses the symbology of the Roman Empire, to claim that same image of power. And he proclaimed Kaiser of the Second Reich. The Second Reich is the Second Empire, because he also claimed that this was the Second Empire, because the First Empire was the Empire of Charlemagne, okay, of the what later was the Holy Roman Empire. So as we can see, there was a lot of like claiming like glorious pasts, and so Germany was officially created and unified in 1871. So we could see that in reality, it was only in 1870, 1871 when both countries were created. Okay, so with this we finish with Unit 3, a unit that is all about deep changes or attempts to change things that were going to have many consequences.